Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Fake News and Need for Librarians, presented by Michelle Kraft. We are so glad that you're here today. And before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items. First, I'm Christine Brown, Outreach Services Librarian for the South Central Regional Library Council. Now I will introduce Michelle. Michelle Kraft is the Library Director for the Cleveland Clinic Health System, coordinating access to library resources and services for 19 hospitals and over 300 outpatient facilities in the United States. Currently, she is the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Medical Library Association, JMLA, and a member of the Journal of the American Medical Association's Library Advisory Board. She has served on the Medical Library Association's Board of Directors and later was elected to serve as president of MLA. Throughout her career, Michelle has been involved in the use of technology impacting the user experience and the retrieval of information. She is an avid sports fan and spends much of her free time at her children's lacrosse and volleyball games. Thank you, Michelle, and you can take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to chatting with you. Feel free to put any of your questions or comments in the chat. I have two screens, so I will be kind of a little bit back and forth. So hopefully my bobbing head doesn't distract you, but I'll do my best to even keep an eye on the chat as well as the slides. When I first got into librarianship, it was right around or very close to the beginning of social media. And I really found social media to be really helpful in my career as a librarian. I was part of Twitter. It broadened my perspective as a medical librarian. I had friends that I first met via Twitter and other social media outlets before I even met them in real life. And then one of the things that I really liked about social media was the ability to share ideas with other librarians and the people who were not even librarians. And in my case, I'm a medical librarian, so I found it really helpful to get ideas and thoughts and from people within the medical profession, nurses, doctors, medical students, patients. And that kind of collaboration was really great, and it really helped me throughout a lot of my career and still does to a certain extent, although Twitter's kind of going down a different way. As many of the positives that I encountered, it opened my eyes to the issue of fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and its impact specifically on health and health information to people, patients, even our own medical professionals and things like that, and people who are seeing this kind of stuff. So it's an area that librarians, I think, for misinformation, we have a way of helping to deal with. It's not something that we can solve, but I think if everybody does a little bit here and there, you can get drops to fill a bucket eventually. So they say a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. The truth is actually this phrase. We aren't even sure who this phrase is attributed to. There are several people that it could be attributed to. Mark Twain, Swift, Churchill, Pratchett, and many others. So even something about lies could even be twisted so you don't even know where the actual original quote about it came from. And I just always found that to be a little bit kind of interesting and funny. One of the things about fake news is that it's been around. And this is the big news. If you didn't know this, fake news has been probably since the dawn of time. We just are seeing it in a different way because we have different technologies to actually experience it. So in this talk that I'll be talking about, I'll be doing a brief history of fake news, a brief rundown of why people are susceptible to fake news. And here's a little hint. It has nothing to do with your education level or your political leanings. Everybody is actually susceptible to fake news. And some of the things that we as librarians can kind of do to try and help mitigate the spread of fake news. So as I mentioned, fake news has been around forever. Historically, fake news has been around probably since humans could write, and I mean written fake news. I'm sure there was verbal fake news before that. Many think of fake news in politics as a recent issue, but within our country, fake news goes back even to the birth of our country. Our founding fathers were fakers of news. In 1769, John Adams wrote in his diary about how he was spending the evening cooking up paragraphs, articles, and occurrences, and working the political engine, planting false and exaggerating stories meant to undermine the British rule. During World War II, it's not just linked to the United States. World War II, British Air Ministry didn't want the German government to know about that they had this newfangled technology, called radar that helped them shoot down the enemy aircraft. British were using it to intercept bombers on night raids. So they started issuing press releases stating that British pilots were eating a lot of carrots to give them exceptional night vision. There are tales that Germans started feeding their own pilots carrots. Whether or not that is true, the British government did really double down on the concept of carrots and night vision, so much so that the British public seemed to buy into it. In addition to government press releases, you started getting advertisements to plant and eat carrots so people could see during the blackouts that proliferated during the war. It is also in current health, the issue of fake news is we're starting to see it now in current health policy. This is a very recent article that was published in the JMLA. It's Decoding the Misinformation Legislation Pipeline, an analysis of Florida Medicaid and the current state of transgender healthcare. This actually was published, like I said, in October, so pretty just hot off the virtual presses. This article describes how legislators used fake news or unsubstantiated information to actually put it to justify changing healthcare legislation. So when they were going through the legislative process, they were actually using I use it in quotes, research that actually was not evidence-based, that was news articles and those kind of things that were not actually medically related to help generate their agenda with healthcare policies for transgender healthcare. So fake news is actually being utilized and moved through the system to the point where it's actually being used in the government to affect policy. So that's some of the examples of how it's being used. What kind of fake news do we have? There's all sorts of type of fake news that we've got. We've got false and deceptive. So false and deceptive are things that basically they're wrong. And then we've got misleading. Misleading is the type of fake news that we encounter when people are promoting agenda with teeny tiny factual information and they spin it to rile up people. Then we have manipulated, and that's also kind of like the misleading one. And we have biased, which contains truthful information, but certain facts are also chosen or admitted to serve the agenda. And we have humor. For this talk, we won't go into humor, but humor is like The Onion or SNL. They're doing it, but it's clearly fake news, but hopefully most people are in on the joke. Every once in a while you see an Onion article that people actually report as news, and that's a whole nother level of confusion and layer to it. But not necessarily all. Why do we have these issues? What is fake news? Why do we lie? So for example, I find sometimes when it's helpful to describe complicated topics, I go to children's literature, which kind of breaks it down into the very basics. And Elise Gravel wrote a book called Killer Underwear Invasion: How to Spot Fake News, Disinformation, and Conspiracy Theories. And basically, she's boiled it down to 5 big reasons on how to on why we lie and why we have fake news. It can be to make money, to be famous, to spread beliefs and ideas, to gain power, and to share info via social media. So all of those 5 information bits actually kind of overlap each other. People want to be famous to make money. People want to spread beliefs and ideas to make money or gain power. People want to gain power, and so they want to make money. All of those can overlap each other. So it's not only just one specific reason, but those are some of the reasons, and they can be political, racial, ethnic, technical, scientific, all types of fake news. That's like more of the subject area, but the reasoning why overlaps. So why do we believe it? It's often a complicated web, and there's several different factors, and all of these factors interconnect into what I like to call the spider web of fake news. It's self-image, it's environment, and it's emotional versus analytical. Oops, I gotta hit the button. There we go. People's susceptibility to fake news often relies upon the alignment of information within their personal beliefs or ideological predispositions. In other words, their self-image. So what they believe is what they see in the mirror or what they have had going on with inside them. When there aren't major clues about the fakiness of a news item, they check it against the bits of information that they are within them that they have retained to assess its compatibility. And the more compatible it is with their beliefs, the more likely they are to assume it is true. People are more likely to accept information that is consistent with their beliefs as true, and messages that don't jive with with a person's bits of knowledges or beliefs get hung up in the processing of that information. Anything that is different from what your norm or used to is gets a little bit hung up in the processing in your brain. And it causes resistance to accept without somebody doing further investigation. So you need to do further investigation. Now that's a little bit of a hang up. Some people don't have time to do further investigation. Some people don't want to do further investigation. Sometimes the message is so different from their preconceived ideas that they just won't do further investigation because it goes against their self-image. But the more the beliefs of evidence that have in support of the fake news, the more effort it is to disprove it. So if somebody believes if somebody has a lot of preconceived ideas or experiences that support the fake news, there's going to be a lot more evidence that needs to be brought up to disprove it. For example, anti-vaxxers and vaccines. The anti-vaxxers have a lot of personal vision and information, and to disprove their theories on vaccinations, really you need a lot more evidence, and even then that makes it difficult, and we can get farther on down because the other 2 parts of the component in the web of fake news come into play. But the more people have that challenges their self-perception, the more evidence that's needed. So it becomes more than just a questioning of whether a particular piece of information is right or wrong. It actually is questioning whether a person's own personal belief system is right or wrong. And on some things, it depends how ingrained that is in the person as to how painful it could be to change that belief system. In short, people endorse or support information that matches their pre-existing beliefs or comes from an ideologically aligned source. Okay. Environment. Humans are social animals, and we tend to associate and socialize with those that are familiar to us and have the same interests and likes. This is both something that is due to familiarity and comfort, but also as well as the situation. Oftentimes the situation is what makes the system familiar and therefore comforting for people. For example, people with children, which is the situation, might share information on the best vacation spots for kids, kid-friendly restaurants, kid-friendly events, and those kind of things. They are in the environment of those kids. By sharing this information with others within the same environment and the same situation, they are sharing information that is familiar to them and comforting. We see this situational sharing often in politics and in education. Left-leaning people and right-leaning people tend to stay within their same environment and share the same type of information within their political spectrum. College-educated people tend to stay within the college-educated environment. Trade industry tends to have the trade industry. Now, there are no absolutes. People are tourists or actually migrate for environments to other environments. For a good example is you can have people in a family that some are college educated and some are trade industry, and so you have a blending of that environment. But for the most part, people have all different types of environments, and that's why I have a bubble here, because there's social bubbles. I might be a person with kids, but I'm also in the college educated environment. I'm also in the kids environment. I don't have any parents that I have to take care of, so I don't have an elder care environment, but I might because my mother is getting older. So those are the environments that I live in. These social bubbles can lead to information bubbleization. Information staying within the bubble that supports the belief and knowledge within those bubbles. And I use without merging or crossing of the bubbles, the information does not leave the bubble and almost reinforces the structure and the environment of that's within that bubble. Our self-image and our own bubble creates our own worldview. And I use also the bubble because if you ever look through a bubble, you can see sometimes the image is distorted. So sometimes the information that you are seeing may not be complete. It might be a little distorted. And our worldview is often different from what is actually being seen outside of the bubble. And as I mentioned, we have many, many bubbles, but there are a lot of bubbles we don't live in and that we aren't even tourists in. I don't live in a bubble that is outside. I mean, I'm trying to think of bubbles that I don't live in. There's a lot of bubbles I don't live in, but there's a lot. I don't live in some bubbles. Like I said, I mentioned I don't live in the bubble of taking care of my parents and aftercare, or care of elderly parents. Those are some of the bubbles that there are bubbles that we don't live in and that we don't become tourists in. The information within our bubbles has the ability to create an echo chamber. It reinforces our beliefs within ourselves and within the bubble. So with technology such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we have created cyber bubbles. So not only do we have our own personal, like in real life environment bubbles, but we also have our like cyber bubbles that social media and online living has actually created for us. Finally, there have been studies that link the relationship between emotions and the susceptibility to fake news. So in the Journal of Cognitive Research, Principles and Implications, authors stated greater emotionality predicted the increase in belief of fake news and decreased the discernment of decreased truth discernment. In other words, no matter if you are more emotional and less skeptic, you have a tendency to believe fake news at the risk of truth behind it. And the emotions I went too quick. The emotions don't have to be negative. They found that it's both positive and negative emotions that appear to impact and affect fake news judgment. The only thing, interestingly, it impacted fake news judgment. It did not impact the belief in real news. So you could be happy, sad, and you believed in the real news, but it increases your chances of believing in the fake news. And like I said, we believe that that negative emotions like fear and stress have an impact, but the authors actually figured out that positive emotions also impacted fake news judgment as well. The only quote unquote emotion that did not impact people's judgment was skepticism. And also interesting, the authors found no meaningful correlation between the different emotions and political affiliation or education. Regardless of who you are, your policy or your political party, your educational level, your emotions played a part in your ability to discern fake news. The more people relied on emotion over reason was the more they perceive fake news to be accurate. So all of these things, belief, self-image, environment, worldview, emotions, factor into our susceptibility to fake news. So what are the ways we can stop the spread? And I think of fake news as kind of like the dandelion in your lawn. Once it gets going and it starts spreading, you're going to have a lot of dandelions everywhere. And it just becomes that much more difficult to stop the spread of fake news. Stopping the spread of fake news is difficult, yet it's important. In Nicole Cook's book, say that 5 times fast. Nicole Cook's book, Fake News and Alternative Facts, Information Literacy in a Post-Truth Era, she states that fake news is a serious threat to information ecosystems, as truth is no longer related to authority, expertise, or real facts, but open to interpretation, perception, emotions, and sentiments. Moreover, fake news is a symptom of greater problems like the politicization of and weaponization of information. The weaponization of information is, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's against what we librarians stand for. So how do we do this? One way is to debunk, another way is to debias, and another way is kind of do pre-bunk inoculation. And I will talk about these ways as well. Debunking is one way to prevent spread of fake news. It's not easy. Debunking relies on challenging the person's mind once they have already received the misinformation. So once the cat's out of the bag. In some situations, this can be effective. And to do it, the best way to do it is the 3 things you must do is retract the misinformation with facts. Simply retracting doesn't, you have to provide an alternate explanation. You have to have the facts so that the person can identify and hold on and remember what the facts were. If you can lead with the correct information rather than repeating the misinformation, that's helpful because repeating the misinformation gets that, again, spreading it. People hear that part more. And then simple explanations are best. And you want to minimize the amount of time you talk about the fake information and focus more on the correct information. You want to repeat the correct information as much as possible. And you want to use credible sources. And the important thing is credible sources. There's no one person who is an expert in everything. So people often rely on a communicator's credibility. If the information comes from a credible source within a person's bubble, they are more likely to believe that information. It carries more weight than if somebody from outside of their bubble. So a lot of times when you're looking at trying to provide the facts and debunk the fake news, finding the people within those communities, within those bubbles. So for example, during COVID, it was very important for health professionals to get members of leadership in church minorities, leaders in other minorities to really push the information, the facts, and minimize the fake news, or just not even address the fake news, really focus on the facts about those kind of things. It is recommended that you have a go-to list of fact-checking authoritative sites. One of my favorite is Snopes.com. I mean, that's a just general fake news site that a site that helps deal with just general fake news and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of different ones out there that you can have as kind of a backup. Debunking is, like I said, extremely difficult for many, many reasons. The biggest is people just generally don't like being told what they think and how they think is wrong. So there's natural resistance to anyone doing that. So you really want to refer back to the self. If you're thinking about it, we want to refer back to the self-image. People endorse or support information that matches their pre-existing beliefs. When you're contradicting those pre-existing beliefs, you're contradicting a part of their sense of self, their community, their being. And again, like I mentioned, the anti-vax movement is a very good example of this. They are part of a whole community where their worldview includes the dangers of vaccine. And often when presented with information on the pros of vaccine to debunk the idea that vaccines are bad, they dig in even more. In the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, the author found that exposure to the belief of threatening evidence leads people to discount the entire scientific matter. In other words, people would rather believe an issue cannot be solved scientifically rather than believing that the scientific evidence goes against their beliefs. So just repeating the information, while that's helpful, there's other things that we can do. And that's along the lines of debiasing and debunking talk. Debiasing and debunking talk, that's basically where you get it. People kind of talk about it is like a dance, so to speak. It's talking to people and getting to people to understand perspectives of each person and helping them reject the fake news through changing their biases. It's not a fast process. It's done through a discussion. But you find their worldview. You use phrasing that doesn't criticize their worldview, but supports part of it. So for example, I use the anti-vaxxers, you would say, I understand the health of your child is very important. And you go from that side of, start asking questions from that side of things. You find peers within their worldview that support the real news and link to those or mention them. For example, outside of the medical side of things, they found that hurricane evacuation notices are more effective when people learn that their neighbors are leaving. So the worldview, when people see that other people within their own worldview are adhering to certain norms, that's more effective. When you're doing debiasing and debunking talk, as I mentioned, it can be difficult because oftentimes the list of facts don't work. Stories, personal touches hold more power. There was a study that took 3 different groups of anti-vaxxers and tried 3 different approaches with each group. Group 1 got facts about the safety of vaccines from the CDC. Group 2 read an unrelated statement about bird feeding. So they were like your control group. And group 3 was shown photos of vaccine preventable diseases and personal story from a woman whose 10-month-old son almost died from measles. Groups 1 and 2 showed no difference on the impact on this on their view of vaccines. Group 3 showed significant positive shift on their thoughts on vaccine. Now, they say positive shift. They weren't going out and running out and getting vaccines that very moment, but it's a shift. Those stories with personal stories hold most of the power than just rattling off facts to people. And again, instead of peppering people with facts, ask questions about their thoughts, how they came to their conclusions. It's not a short process, and it's something that we as librarians may not be able to focus on ourselves. However, we can use that information to help people who are talking to people on an ongoing basis. So those of us who are medical librarians, we can use that to help our nurses, our doctors, our medical students learn how to do this type of debunking and debiasing. For those of us in other areas, academics, you can work with journalists, you can work with other groups, educators, all of those kind of groups to try and help them learn how to do that type of debiasing. Debunking, or which they are actually calling inoculation too, is the process of debunking fake news and its sources before it happens. So the idea of pre-bunking, like I said, is inoculation theory. A small amount of virus is the case, in this case, fake news, can help our minds ward off future exposure. Exposing people to how fake news is created allows them to develop skills to make sense of information that we are inundated with and make a more rational and skeptical, skilled decisions regarding the information. So a Cambridge research team created the site Bad News Game. And what they did was it was a choose your own adventure type of website where the player's goal was to become the best disinformation, fake news tycoons mega person. And they went through this thing, and when they compared the bad news players to the control group, they found the bad news players were able to recognize fake news better than the control group. And the effects lasted for several months. And if the bad news players were went back and played the game more or did other things with it, periodic boosting, they showed that it continued to last. So bad news is one example. The other one is First Draft News, or First Draft. That's created by Laura Garcia and Tommy Shane and is affiliated with Harvard's Kennedy School, and is a website on how to develop pre-bunking tools. And it includes a list of games, including bad news. And they're described as their site is described as a treasure trove on thinking and training and research tools, and more on how to combat online mis and disinformation. And another example is Go Viral. That's another game similar to Bad News on how you can make things go viral and ways you can make the distribution of fake news faster. So when you think of pre-bunking, and does a librarian start to think of information literacy? Just something to put out there. When you're starting to think of pre-bunking, information literacy. So much in our information literacy has been evaluating how we interpret the literature, whether it's true. Our information literacy needs to go beyond that. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So why am I throwing AI in here? Well, AI is no more fake news than Facebook. Like Facebook and other information resources, it's the medium through which the fake news is distributed. And by now you've all heard about how ChatGPT scrapes words and information from websites and arranges it in ways similar to human response and to try and provide an answer. However, there's a lot of questions as to whether the information it presents is really correct. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And a lot of times it's making it up. And we don't know where it's coming from. A lot of these free AIs, these AI systems, are getting their information from the web. So everything on the web, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the truly, really, really bad, that is what AI is actually pulling the data from, especially the ones that don't tell us where it's pulling the data from. There are other AIs that have closed data where, like, for example, there might be a medical AI that really is only looking at medical journal articles and things like that. Those, you have an idea of where it's pulling the information from, and there's other questions about what it's generating. I'm talking about the AIs that everybody's just using right now off the cuff for fun. So anything, the good, the bad, the ugly that's out on the website, it's going to be there. And so that is something that makes it difficult. And unfortunately, we're starting to see where AI is copying AI. So if AI comes up with the misinformation, it's going to copy and distribute it to another AI and provide misinformation. And the way I'm saying copying isn't exactly the way it does it, but you get the idea. So what is the librarian's role? I came up with a few ways, and there's a lot of ways we can do these. I just did it with the 3 ways that I see librarians, what they are doing and have been doing in the past, and making it, tweaking it to adjust to AI. One is through collection evaluation. linking or creating tools. And the other one is education and collaboration. So when we're talking about collection, again, I'm coming from a medical perspective. There is a book out there, and I won't name it, but the author has been basically convicted of federal fraud crimes and continues to publish books out there. He's been found in contempt of court for making deceptive claims about his books and fined more than $5 million and banned from infomercials for 3 years regarding fraudulent claims for his books. Yet I found this book in 18 editions in 2,103 libraries. And I found them in medical libraries. I found them found it in the National Library of Medicine. For those, we need to take more ownership of the books that we put on our shelves. I realize from a public library standpoint, this is extremely difficult because we are buying what the public is asking for. But if you are in an area that isn't buying what the public is asking for, if you are in a special library or an academic library, having a more skeptical eye on what we are collecting and really taking ownership of that collection and whether it's got correct information. Can we be perfect at it? No, but we need to do more than just going through a list and buying the most popular things that were in the list. The other concern is that we've got old information on our shelves. So and again, I'm coming from the medical library perspective, but we really don't want old information on our shelves. There are older books that exist that are not that old, actually, that refer to certain sexual health conditions as mental disorders. That is no longer the case, but we might have some of those books that on our shelves that have that information. We also need to look on our virtual information as well, and things online. Why do we have these things online? Predatory journals. Predatory journals are a real booger. They are there, and they are like the Nigerian prince email, only like ramped up 1,000, because they find journals titles that are almost exactly similar to the legit journal, and then charge people for publishing articles in their journals. We have to pay attention to retractions. People are human. People make mistakes. Research is done by humans still, and we make mistakes. Retractions are important because we don't want the spread of misinformation or disinformation to continue to go forward, especially in research. So, for example, if you are a subscriber to Browsine, Browsine has partnered with Retraction Watch. So when you pull up an article and an article that has been retracted, you get a big red notification that this article has been retracted, and they give you information as to why it was retracted. Then we have to also be careful about preprint. During COVID, there was a lot of focus on preprint servers and information going onto the web, because the time it takes to publish an article is a very long time. I mean, especially with COVID and other fast-moving diseases, we want to get that information on how to treat people as soon as possible. Unfortunately, with the way how long it takes to publish articles, it can take a longer time. So people are putting them on preprint servers. Ideally, this is awesome. Functionally, we need some people to pump some brakes. There was a study in which they found that over 50% of the journals that went into medRxiv, that's a medical preprint server, were published in 50% of the journals that were published in a peer-reviewed journal that were also published on medRxiv contained different information. So there was differences in the data, there was differences in the conclusions, and some of those had different titles. So if you were looking at an article that had a title in a preprint server, you wouldn't know it was changed when it got published in a real journal because it had a different title. And someone was mentioning that they're concerned about collections like Hoopla, where we have no control over, but might have a lot of titles that promoting vaccine misinformation and disinformation. That is a problem. We need to start looking at our online collections and seeing how we're not going to be perfect and there's going to be stuff in there, but we also need to start talking to some of these vendors and calling them to task. There's no reason why they should have some of these things, depending upon the scope of what their resource is, and ask them, why is it in here? Start questioning. Questioning is a bad thing. Remember, skepticism is what got people to better discern the fake news. So what we can do also is one thing I forgot to mention, like with the online stuff, we have to be again skeptical. The unvetted information may not, while some things that are in preprint journals are good, we need vetting of it. There was a flawed article on ivermectin, and it was put in the preprint journal. It was put in a preprint server. It fueled, actually, that article is what fueled the interest in the drug ivermectin to fight COVID. Before that article was withdrawn, it was downloaded and viewed more than 150 times and cited 30 times in the preprint server. It's actually included in a meta-analysis in the American Journal of Therapeutics that found ivermectin to be greatly reduced the COVID deaths. So that is why it is very concerning. We have to take a skeptical mind and look at some of these things that we have online and really kind of call, there's the good and the bad of having things quickly online, but we need to be aware of that. We need to arm ourselves with all right, 11:45. I got to keep moving. We need to arm ourselves with people and the people we serve with the tools to help and counter fake news. Here are some of the examples. I mentioned bad news earlier, but then there's some websites. So here's some good actual sources, like a LibGuide on fake news. Washington University's library also has another really good on what was fighting COVID misinformation. And another one, actually, another LibGuide on patient health information. And then the Kraft tool, I love that name. It's on the right-hand side. It's how to spot fake news. That's another tool that we can help people understand and use and help to spot it. And then linking to basic articles on stopping the spread. We can create these websites on how, basically, the one thing I love about being a librarian and LibGuides is we can look at what other people have done and we don't have to recreate the wheel. We can actually see what they're linking to, evaluate it, see if it works for our patrons, and go from there. So creating these websites to help stop the spread, linking to basic articles on stopping the spread. And then I have in here information to help clinicians to stop the spread. As I mentioned, I'm a medical librarian, so I take it from that perspective. But if you have other people that you serve, if you are working with clergy, are you working with social workers? Are you working with other people? Information to help those people stop the spread. And collaborating. We need to have better partnerships. I really think that public libraries, journalism schools, schools of public health, medical libraries really need to start partnering better together with each other to help support each other on what we can do to help the spread of this, or help prevent the spread of fake news. There's a really good resource called If I Apply that actually is a source evaluation tool. So as I mentioned earlier, media and information literacy, librarians tend to do information literacy like, is this a legit source? We don't go beyond that. We don't look at what resources it was linking, what resources is the linking that are linking to. So we need to reflect more on that and reflect on the digital landscape and how that really impacts things. We need to remind our people there's a big difference between correlation and causation. I mean, for example, you could say that people in general who are above, or men above 6'2" are are more likely to excel in basketball, or you find more people in who are above 6'2" in the NBA. Doesn't mean everybody who is 6'2" is going to excel in basketball. So there's a difference between correlation and causation. And I'm sorry, I kind of blubbled that up a bit, but that's kind of what we have to remember is people forget there's a big difference between causation and correlation. And it's really, the basketball example is easier to think about, but when you start getting into like more heady and difficult concepts, it's difficult to consider. And then I mentioned the lateral reading. Lateral reading is going and looking at the sources of the information that you are looking at to see if they're right. What perspective are they coming from? Where did they get this information? Is there a difference between, is there bias that's within it? So one thing that I want to say is, like I mentioned earlier, we're not going to solve fake news in one drop. It's not going to be happening. It's been happening since the dawn of time, and that's important. So in this time where everybody is overwhelmed with a lot of things, people are getting burnt out, I don't want to have people saying, I don't want to be like saying, this is what we're going to be doing, we need to stop it all, because it's not going to stop it. But what we can do to leave our place a better place is we can address it one leg at a time. And I found this, there's actually these pants on Amazon that are newspapers, but addressing fake news one leg at a time. We're putting we're trying to, like, this should, as it's being spread, we are getting it a little bit here and there so that we are not the ones who are helping continue its spread. And I want to say one of my favorite things about being a librarian is that we love finding information and sharing it with people. And fake news keeps getting in the way and it keeps muddying the message. But I think if each of us does a little bit here and there and works with those who can influence it more and more, we can stop that. The lie may be getting halfway around the world before our pants, before the truth gets a chance to put its pants on. But we don't have to stand there. We can keep doing it and working on it and making the place a little bit better than where it was. So with that, I want to thank you all. I really, really enjoyed this presentation and chatting with you all. If you have any questions, just let me know and you can put it in the chat, or I don't know how you guys want, Christine wants to run it. Maybe people want to have questions and talk. There we go. I stopped sharing. Yeah, and Allison mentions one of my experiences as academic librarian teaching about misinformation is a struggle due to the lack of time and the students coming in with little to no previous skills and knowledge. Exactly. And that's where I think where it helps to have partnerships, working with different departments within the academic institutions with the different, depending upon the departments. I mean, like I said, the journalism school, public health information school, but then also, I mean, you can weave that into, English composition classes and things like that, not English literature, but argumentative essay kind of competencies and things like that. Other questions or thoughts? Oh, Asia wanted to know the author. And hold on, I'll tell you the author. And unfortunately, I always get it confused with the President of Canada because the last name is the same, Trudeau. So the President of Canada is Justin Trudeau. So, okay, the author of the book that I mentioned is Kevin Trudeau. Sorry, I have to go through that roundabout way of doing it. The Journal of Applied Psychology, can I share that? Yes, I will send it to Christine because I am working from home and I don't have that article right next to me. I have a stack of articles like that big. Yeah, and I agree, Kara. Taking a stand as to what that library and an area within misinformation. Yeah, there's misinformation everywhere. And that is difficult. And so I think oftentimes with, working in communications and marketing for public libraries is I would focus more on arming the people to understand how to make the decisions, not necessarily playing whack-a-mole with all the different the different fake news that come out every other day, 30 seconds here and there. I would focus more on empowering your people within the public library to become better consumers of information. Chrissy, you have that is a very good question, and that's brought up a lot when I was doing my research on misinformation and disinformation and fake news and public libraries. There is a big concern about, are we there to provide information and not question what people are asking for, or are we the ones to tell them what they should be looking for? That is a very difficult, ethical, thorny bush that public librarians and your public library has to kind of navigate. And I think by asking these questions and discussing it, we do a better job of navigating navigating that road. There's no one right reason or one right way for each public library, but I think just getting the discussion out there is key and helping to understand it. Because I think in the past, public librarians just kind of bought things to buy things that people asked for, which isn't necessarily bad, but nowadays we really need to think a little bit more. At least that's in my opinion. And Chrissy, you wanted more information on how to speak to anti-vaxxers, changing their worldview. I will find more of those articles. It's a discussion, and it may not be you. It may be somebody else they trust. I'm not saying they don't trust you. I'm just saying it's more of a dance and a discussion overall, but I'll find those and I'll send those out as well to Christine. So anti-vax articles, and then the one that was on that was on the Journal of Applied Psychology.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, wait. Okay. Will there be a resources list of all the URLs mentioned? The ones that are in the slides, I'll be sending out the slides. I'm not sure if there were any others.
And I could send the two things that people asked for in the chat to Christine. If there's other art, I have a stack of research. I'm not sure you want all of them. And literally, it's like the old school phone books. Oh, Chrissy, if you're writing a paper on it, I want to really tell you really quick. When I was doing the research, make sure you include misinformation and disinformation along with the term fake news. When I was doing research, I found an unfortunately article. Fortunately it was an article, but unfortunately it was an article written by librarians that said it was a systematic review of how librarians are handling fake news, and their systematic review strategy was really poor. They only used the term fake news. They didn't use misinformation. They didn't use disinformation. And some of the other varying terms, as you start to get down the rabbit hole, you'll start to see some of that kind of information. So I wanted to just encourage you to mention misinformation or disinformation when you're doing the research. And yeah, Kara, fake news has political baggage as a term. And yeah, misinformation, disinformation, that might be something that you want to use if from a public facing side of things. People think of fake news and they really polarize it politically, whether it's to the left or to the right. And that's unfortunate because it's neither. It's wrong. It's just fake news. But when you're working with people where the baggage can be very problematic, misinformation and disinformation is what I would use for the terms. Misinformation is like somebody accidentally screwed up and gave you the wrong information. So it's not necessarily deliberate. Disinformation is deliberate. So it could be passing along the misinformation, knowing that it's incorrect is also disinformation. It's very layered. It's like an onion.
Great. Well, I have 12 o'clock. I'm not seeing any more questions or comments. I thank you very much, Michelle, and thank all of you for being here today.
Thank you.